Good morning, everyone. Just gonna give a few seconds here for people to stream in and then we'll get started. Good morning, BJ.
Good morning, Sons. I'm glad to hear your voice from across the country. Happy December, sweetheart.
Happy December. Jeez, the fastest month of the year.
Yeah, maybe we'll get through the solstice quickly too and on to the up the ascent again into light. Okay.
I think we've got, you want to get started, BJ?
Yeah, I want to make sure people can see Maisie.
Most important.
Most important. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, hello. Welcome back, everybody, or welcome to new folks. Sonia and I, our little metal community, we love doing these webinars because they're really these are just meant to be little forays into subject matter. I mean, an hour, of course, can't boil the ocean, wouldn't try, but we want to kind of hit some high notes here. The way this works, we'll go through some slides to level set and get some basic themes out there. And all that is to really set up the conversation. And that's the fun part where you guys can ask questions, we can share stories, talk it out. And before I cut over to Sonia to explain a little bit more about that, just to remind folks, excuse me, that this really needs to be a safe place. It's to get real and share openly and ask silly questions, say silly things, or whatever it is. So within the bounds of kindness and basic morality and legality, anything goes. So don't hold back. Today we're going to talk about disability. It's a talk we've done, I think, once before. Again, huge subject. But we'll hit some high notes and try to sink in a little bit. But as a next step, back to you, Sons. Tell us a little bit about how to interact.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for being here. So as BJ mentioned, he's going to go through some slides to start and just kind of talk about the theme of the day. And then after that, he'll close those slides down and you can ask your questions or just, comment on anything that you heard. So there's two ways you can do that. You can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question to BJ. Or if you'd prefer not to do that, you can type your question into the Q&A section and I will read it aloud for you. So again, two ways: raise your hand, ask your question out loud, or type it into the Q&A and I will read it out to BJ for him to answer. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. We're really glad.
Thank you, Sonia. All right, guys, let's jump in. Okay, disability, we probably all have some sense of what that means, but let's define it a little bit and then we'll try to tear apart that word a little. So a person having a physical or mental condition that limits movements, senses, or activities. So it's defined in some sort of loosely in some sort of functional sense. You can see right out of the bat, a person having a mental or physical condition. I think more and more we're on this planet, we realize those two are not different, separate things. So right out of the chutes, there's trouble with the word, and we'll talk more about that. But not to get too tedious, this is essentially what it is. So many of us will meet this description. We'll talk a little bit about the numbers here in a moment. So one thing that's really important, and that I learned thanks to my mother, you guys have probably, if you've been on these things before, you'll undoubtedly remember me referring to my mom, who's taught me personally a ton. I mean, she had polio as an infant and then has experienced post-polio syndrome much of my adult life. And so I've been around this notion of disability for a long time, and long enough to be suspicious of it as an idea. But one thing I got to inherit before I myself joined the ranks of the disabled uh, is that is to how to couch this notion. And in the US, this idea, it really we hit a new stride when we came to understand access for folks with disabilities as a civil right. And this, of course, comes out of a lot of activity in our country in the 1960s. Often, generally, usually, of course, understood in the context of race, another sort of made-up construct, but not. It does not disinclude. It's gotten less attention, but does not disinclude issues around disability. So, before early 1900s, I mean, the history around disability and illness in this country and beyond is, of course, checkered. It used to be impolite and in some cities illegal to be on the streets with a disability. So it's shocking to understand, to even comprehend that. But recently, in our lifetimes, a lot has changed. A lot has happened. There's way more to go. In the current, what's the word? Reawakening or awareness or something around equity, inclusion. These conversations offer new opportunities for this subject to further evolve. So there's a history here. 1960s as I'm referencing, of course. 1973 was the Rehabilitation Act, and this tied federal funding to access for people with disabilities. As happens, the law is one thing, the practice of it is different, and this is still very much a work in progress. A few years hence, the Education for All, a Handicapped Children Act came into being, sort of to unsegregate schooling and public education around issues of disability. And then the big one, it was the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a big deal. And that really helped instantiate this issue as a civil rights issue. Importantly, the ADA, as profound as a leap forward as it was in terms of civil society and legal protections, this too, the ADA is not policed. So it's enforced through civil action, lawsuits, and which makes it clunky and difficult. And there are all sorts of details to the ADA. But this is, for me, it was really, that is the year I myself became disabled. And so my timing was good. So for a lot of us, you may not know that, curb cuts, access to public transportation, for a long time, that was just the stuff of charity. There was no guarantee that you could, if you were using a wheelchair, that you could take a bus, for example, or cross the street without a curb cut. So it's kind of shocking to maybe some younger folks now, but this is in our lifetimes, not that long ago. Still a work in progress, more to go, realizing the ideals of these policies. So that's a little bit about the history. Some of you guys might have seen the film Crip Camp about Judy Heumann's experience. If you haven't watched it, it's a really good one, and it can further shed light onto this issue, this suite of issues. There are all sorts of other pieces of culture to point to, but that's been a recent one. A lot of people, that's gotten some attention. It's really beautiful. I'd suggest you watch it. One thing that I had seen with my mom, but really didn't feel in deep in my bones until I became obviously disabled. I'm sorry, I keep referencing my own experience, and that's not to. I don't mean to say, hey, like I represent disability, but just to personalize it and to be honest about how I've learned what I know, and just to be out of the closet, in some way. It just felt personally like an act of sort of revolutionary act to wear shorts in this world. I'm not kidding. Sometimes I feel like it's like an act of defiance. Less so nowadays, but early on, I can tell you stories about my own experience of being treated like for me, it was the feeling was I either got treated like Frankenstein, some sort of freakish monster, and I would watch parents pull their kids away from me, and looks of repulsion on people's face when they took in my silhouette. I'm not kidding. It may sound dramatic, but I can lots of stories about that. And also, sometimes as a disabled person, you get treated as somehow like a Christ figure, like somehow you have special knowledge. That's all over the place. And of course, whether in the positive-ish of sort of Christ-ish character or the negative-ish of a Frankenstein, both are ridiculous and untrue, of course. I'm a human being, period. And I'll just say, I realized even as I was trying to learn how to walk on these legs and et cetera, and navigate the world and deal with pain or whatever, by far the most challenging thing that I and many people I've talked to around disability experience is the projections of others. And here too, like everything I think we're going to talk about here, these are on a spectrum. It's not like these are unique experiences for people with disabilities or anything else. We all project onto each other all the time. So I don't want to over pathologize the notion, but the wild, disparate, and unrealities of the projections of others, for me, has been the most difficult thing about being disabled, which is, I think, an interesting point. Like, the hardest thing about being disabled is other people. So there's a lot to say here. Again, it's also normal. Human interaction is as far as I can tell, is an exercise in projecting. The hope, of course, is that the projections we bring them closer and closer into alignment with the reality or the experience of the person onto which we're projecting. So on some level, no harm, no foul here, but on some level, it's a big problem. And this gets at how any of us defines ourselves or each other. This issue of identity, it's so big and so problematic. On some level, I think a lot of us who become disabled in life go through, which of course can happen any old time to anybody, which I think is part of the fear that lurks around the subject, is you could fall into this, what feels like a pit any moment. And just like death, it has this lurking quality for some people. But I think one of the reasons why it's so scary is like, who am I then, right? If I can no longer play football, or if I can no longer whatever, then who am I? And I remember at first this was a real problem for me personally when I was 19, but then with love and support of others and some access to education, it became also a creative play. I think, let's hear from you guys too, but I think identity is something that is made up. I think there's an irreducible side to all humans, that underneath all of the veneers, there is some piece of us that is constant, maybe. But a lot of the stuff that we understand to be our identity, who I am, who you are, is actually kind of made up. And there's an opportunity there. That's what I mean. You can create your identity. Even as it's difficult and sad to lose one's identity, the upshot is you can make one, create it. And that's lovely. But it also is part of the mind bending experience around illness and disability, aging, all sorts of ways. So this big question of identity, it's powerful, it's important, and asking and answering the question of who are you? But I would guess the point here is that is a work in progress if we let it be. And I think a lot of us in the disability world know this very, very well. And then of course there's I wonder, someone tell me if there's a word for this, the gap or the delta, the difference between who you think you are and who the world thinks you are. Those two things don't always add up. And that can feel tricky. So it's a little bit related to projections, a little bit different. So it's, I will say, one of the hard things back to this projections is I would like to think each of us has a hand in our own identity, but very often we feel stuck with what other people think of us. And therein is a big old rub. So stats, okay, so roughly 60 million folks in the US are living with some form of disability. That's, about 1 in 5 people. That's a lot. 4.5 million folks, veterans, living with a service-connected disability. 6.5 million folks with an intellectual disability. 21 million, excuse me, 21 million folks with an ambulatory disability, folks who are walking around, in other words, but are affected nonetheless. So big numbers. And we'll talk a little bit later about chronic illness versus disability, what they share in common, what they don't. But anyway, this is not exotic, or these are not small numbers. This is not a teeny little minority that you can forget about, especially because we can all join this crew anytime, and most of us will in our lifetimes. So don't make the mistake of don't otherize this stuff. That's where so much trouble comes into play, of course. Well, like I was mentioning here, disability and chronic illness, weirdly or not, these are kind of feel like different issues. I mean, first of all, chronic illness doesn't necessarily result in it's not necessarily a disabling condition per se. In other words, it doesn't, back to that definition, it doesn't necessarily eat into one's functional abilities in the world. But boy, they're pretty close, pretty related. And then again, if you're talking about projections, identity, these boundaries between these distinctions really start getting very porous. So it reminds me of a story some of you guys will remember or whatever, may recognize. I one of the things I sometimes is, again, part of sort of making sure to live out loud as a disabled person so that we see ourselves in each other. Sometimes it's been a while, but I used to talk to school kids around the subject. And, to kind of co-relate with kids who are, most of whom were otherwise able-bodied. Kids would always ask me, like, don't you wish you had 2 hands? Don't you miss your feet, or some variation on that theme? And I always love that opportunity because it's fun to say things like, yeah, sure, 2 hands was great. I wouldn't mind having 2 hands. That's wonderful. But yeah, kiddo, don't you miss having 3 hands? And I love watching kids' face if we ever get to that comment, because it's sort of like, what? Like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But some kids actually seem to get the point, which is like, they're not sitting there, wishing. They see themselves in this normal silhouette. They are not wasting much time, wish they didn't have extra limbs or 3 heads or whatever else, because it's ridiculous. Similarly, it's ridiculous for me at this point in medical science to have 2 hands. And so part of the exercise here is this working within and holding lightly and being even a little suspicious of the context in which we are put. I missed 2 hands, but again, after some grieving and I'm just so glad to have 1 hand. Am I unlucky that I lost 2, or am I lucky to have 1, especially my right hand? All of the above. And you've heard us talk on these webinars about things like grief and how we come to move with our reality over time. Grief's a big piece of that. and how you get yourself to inhabit the new context you find yourself in. But my point here is those are issues for all of us to consider, like identity, etc. Who are we comparing and contrasting? Who gets to be considered the standard person? Who is this normal person against whom we're judged? It's a really, really important question for anyone and everyone to ask themselves. In part, so you don't take your life for granted. And in part, so you understand and see yourself and your experience and understand, or at least empathize with the experience of others. So a little bit of a detour there, but I just want to kind of call out the made upness of disability. Whose frame of reference are we talking about? So that kind of thinking, I learned that again from my mom and through thinking about philosophy and justice. So that's the disability world. Disability rights movement has been playing with this stuff for a while to all of our benefits, if you let it. Chronic illness is usually, that language puts you in the medical realm. And as you've heard us talk about here, the medical realm is powerful, amazing, but it is a model. It is not to be confused with the totality of reality or something like that. So in some ways, chronic illness, the world of chronic illness and the world of disability are distinct. But in the ways in which they're distinct, like some of this stuff is sort of made up. I know many people who live with chronic illness who don't think of themselves as having a disability, don't give themselves that credit in a way, or that sense of community in a way. And it's important to understand just how suspicious the disability rights movement is of healthcare and medicine. Just like about any other group that is considered outside the sort of norm, in the bucket of other, whether it's race, physical ability, etc., we have a long history of isolating, separating those folks with those things, separating them, isolating, otherizing. And again, that's so much of the problem here. So what we need to do here is sort of rejigger all of that. I hope personally, while we're on this one, the disability world is a beautiful world. It's a creative world. It's a tough world. It's a diverse world. You know, just because I am disabled doesn't mean I have all that much in common with someone who's dealing with cerebral palsy or whatever else. That's another thing. We just get lumped into this one catchment together. There's an amazing array of folks within the disability community, but there's a community. Chronic illness, less so. I think there's a lot to be done interdigitating these worlds. And the medical world has a lot to learn from the disability rights community. And I started to say there's a lot of suspicion around healthcare and medicine and disability because we've been warehoused. There's an abysmal history of warehousing, people getting them out of view. So the idea, and it's more recently, that we can get healthcare to cover home care so that people can live and die in their own home. There's so much to say about that issue. It's cheaper, it's many things, it's better in so many ways, and yet we don't have a great history of doing that. It's changing. But one hope for palliative medicine, this kind of unique piece of healthcare that has a method of revisiting or rethinking these issues. I really hope that can act as a portal to heal some of the divides with the disability community. It really is the height of tragedy that folks who live with disability, because invariably they have to interact with healthcare, almost invariably they interact with healthcare, that there's a schism in there. The disability world and the medical world should be such close friends, and we're not, for all sorts of reasons. So anyway, I've been saying a lot of words again. So let's see here. Let me move on. Oh, that was the last slide. So, okay, I think I kind of, again, covering the waterfront there. I hope that makes some sense. But let's open this up, guys. Love. I'm going to look at my phone just to make sure I'm keyed in with Sonia here. But Any questions, comments, thoughts out there? Anything, positive, negative? Feel free to destroy anything I just said, whatever. Any hands up, Sones?
Not yet, but as you were speaking, I'm wondering if you want to just talk about something that I've noticed come up a lot, and that's kind of being the expert of your own body, even when you're in a room full of medical professionals.
Oh, goody, goody, goody. Yeah. So this is so key, and again, why palliative care has at least this potential to change the game, because this deference to the subjective experience of the patient or the caregiver is so key, so elemental. I'm sorry, let me just close the slides here, guys, real quick. So one of the things, of course, that we would advocate for, and it seems so important to navigating these riddles, is to finding some way to really inhabiting your own experience. It's so seductive and tricky. The doctors, medicine, has a real expertise. And so a doctor may know more about the physiology of amputations, for example, or polio, than the person living with those conditions. But it's not about the molecular. That's not the point. I mean, that expertise is to be used thoughtfully. But what ends up happening, in some ways, we in the public are overly deferential, or have a history of being overly deferential to medical professionals. And in some ways, the medical culture kind of tries to rise above and somehow suggest they're experts. But again, just knowing the physiology or the molecular effects of disability or illness is far from being an expert of what it means or what it's like to live in such shoes. And as empathetic as clinicians can be, sometimes those gaps go unmet. So one of the things to really be serious about, if I heard your question or your comment right, Sons, is, don't hand yourself over to the hospital or the doctors, even if they seem to be asking for it or suggesting you should. That's for many reasons that happens. But here again, we should all be the boss of our own experience. We are the expert in what it's like to live with these things. So own that expertise. And that doesn't mean that I'm not suggesting an arrogance or, to fall in the trap of, I don't want to doctor bash or anything else. I think medicine can do many things, but you have to wield that. You as a patient, as a consumer, need to wield that thoughtfully and carefully and use it lest you get used by it. So did I hear your question correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Just, I feel like this has come up before, of just people saying like they end up teaching their doctors and clinicians a lot about themselves, about their body, what they can handle, what they can't, and just pointing out that advocacy is real.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, you said it just perfectly. And it's also a corollary. What you're saying too is one of the, back to the hardest part about being disabled is other people, and I know my friends who have different colored skin and have to deal with this too, like not only have to deal with your own issues, but you have to be in this role of either just taking the junk that people give you, or you got to teach people. And sometimes that's exhausting. And sometimes personally, I'm not up to it, but sometimes I am. And sometimes those learning moments can be really a real connection. So one, want to acknowledge what you're saying. So on the hard side, like, damn it, I got to teach the world about these basic things. Why don't they just look in the mirror? On the other hand, it's also an opportunity. In this way, healthcare will improve, medicine will improve, to stick with that question for a second, if we, patients and caregivers, inform it better and push it. So there's a real dance in there. But yeah, thanks so much for bringing me back to that one. That's an important one.
Yeah, so, okay, in that time, we've had some hands go up. Esther, I will unmute you here. You should just have to unmute yourself on your end. There you go.
Yeah, I think so. Hello,
Hey,
hello.
Esther.
Hey,
Esther.
hello, hello. My apologies, I came in late, so maybe you spoke to this a bit, but just as you've been speaking, Vijay, a couple things have come up that I thought I would just offer, just to get conversation going a little bit, or foster conversation. Just as you were speaking about relationship with the medical community, words like reciprocity and partnership were coming up for me. That it's a relationship, and that actually, you said, well, you're not suggesting that we be arrogant or that sort of thing, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it's really okay to embrace the idea that we're the experts in our own world and in our own lives and of our own bodies, and it's okay to express that and advocate for that, and to be heard in that. And in some ways, that leads to the idea that maybe we also can, in the world, in the very general society, culture, greater worlds, greater communities, that we have lots to learn from each other. And maybe we have a lot to learn from, as you say, the disabled community. I have other friends that prefer the term handicapped. I have other friends that prefer the term differently abled. So whatever language works for people, that we have a lot to learn from folks, and how maybe some of the things that you're talking about can also be extended, or we might want to think about them just being the way things are. That we asked a person, what do you need in this? What, part of this relationship that we can extrapolate from these experiences and apply them, that eventually maybe it's just the way stuff is, as opposed to a conversation that keeps having to happen.
Yeah. Sorry if I just cut you off, Esther. Yeah.
No, does that make sense?
Oh, such sense. Yeah. And I love that. Right. I'm like, yeah, this is exchange. I think ideally we're all learning from each other all the time. And yeah, there is so much to learn. In medicine at its best, in current training, there's a phrase around of cultural humility we're trying to instantiate in trainees, which is just simply, hey, Esther, help me understand your experience. I'm just simply not pretending to know.
Assumption.
What's that?
Assumption. There's something in there around our need to assume things about each other. You talked about projection. Maybe it's a cousin.
Yeah, I think it is. And that old saw, don't assume, makes an ass out of you and me. I think there's some truth in that. And we do this all the time. And I feel for my brethren in the clinical world, because sometimes the public wants us to know, like we know, like they want us to be omniscient.
Sure.
That's a terrible pressure.
This feels
too often we play to it. Yeah. I mean, so there's so much. You're right on. I'm a continuous learning model for all of us. It's not like we disabled folks have plenty to learn ourselves from each other. So yeah, amen. Let's just reciprocity, back to that beautiful word. This is an exchange all the time if we let it be. But it hasn't been that way. So especially nowadays, I still think there is room for, sometimes I think we do need to sort of scream out loud and say, hey, pay attention. I wish we didn't. But there is a time for that. Yeah.
And it's just that idea that it's an idealistic notion, I guess, that in so many parts of so many things, maybe we can keep shooting for getting to a place where it's just doesn't have to be a continual conversation. Maybe that's way down the road. Maybe that's never, I don't know. It's to do a little bit with the myth of the other thing that came up was maybe it's about the myth of normalcy.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. What the hell is normal anyway? Who's that?
I think that's the first myth, my own self.
I think that's right. And I think there's such, like anything related to DEI issues, like how wonderful the pageantry of human experience is, so broad and glorious and terrifying and so many things. I don't know why we keep reducing it. So I think if we can all, illness, death, some of our other favorite subjects, they have a way of sort of elbowing the wall, prying the walls open. So there's a lot, and I do think in my own lifetime, I'm 51 now, things have shifted and improved. These conversations are less exotic. So I do think there's some action here, but I think the enterprise of continuously learning for all of us, for any of us, is just that, a continuous enterprise. We have to remind ourselves again and again. So Esther, we have a bunch of hands coming up, but I love talking to you. We can talk
that's
for
awesome.
hours. But thank you for kicking us off.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time.
Oh yeah, it's so fun talking to you. So Sones, what else is going on out there?
Okay, quite a few things come in. So Karen asked, is there such a thing as anticipatory disability? As a cancer patient, I can envision a time when I will become less able-bodied than I am. What is the value of preparing for disability? My identity is already in play, but I haven't thought of this as heading me towards disability physically.
Well, I think so. And if I take your question right, Karen, I think, I think we could, anticipatory grief, anticipatory concerns, anticipatory fears, those can help teach us something that we need to look at. And I think that's very real. Like we're saying here, by some measure, most or all of us will join this crew at some point in our lives. So I think and that can be jarring, but if you let it, it can also be expansive making. And I think rather than try to project yourself into all these possible experiences, one would be simply just striking a fluid tone with your sense of identity, who you are, and what you rely upon to tell you who you are. And if you hold that loosely and lightly and get in the habit of that being fluid and dynamic, then for my money, that's where I would point any of us, is to stake that ground rather than necessarily try to imagine things that may or may not happen per se. So I think it's great life lessons, great preparation for whatever's coming for any of us, to just have this, like I say, this very fluid notion of identity. And if I take your question correctly, Karen, that's what I think.
Okay, this one I think you're gonna like. This person said, my question is about design process. I have a design background, and my question is about, what do you think like a designer can do to support the transformation of society in urban structures or in products and places that surround people?
Yeah, you're right. I love this question. I mean, there's so much cool work to be done. One of the things when you move into the world of disability, like for me, it's prosthetic limbs. And so much of the durable medical equipment world, the adaptive equipment world, traditionally has been so butt ugly. Like, it's sort of like, it's almost like the design world has not really been involved, is my sense. Like design thinking of what could be is really has been underdeveloped, and it's such a creative charge. Like, if you think of adaptive equipment as this sort of poor replacement for something that someone lost, well, And that's just a limited, unnecessarily limited, dispiriting, uninspired thing. Whereas, what could this be? My sense of with prosthetic limbs. I mean, I've come to love the design of my. Look at that! Look how skinny my ankles are. I love these things. They're so wild, and they're made out of carbon fiber, and they're slick, and they're fast. Wow. I mean, and it's starting to think of like in Paralympic athletics, like it's become a real question. Would it be unfair for the able-bodied folks if disabled people were included, if the Paralympics and the Olympics converged on some level, that these disabilities, always framed as less than, some departure from, if we start realizing the positive side of the horizon there, what could this be? This could be an unfair advantage. I could have legs that were, made me jump 30 feet in the air. Who knows what's possible? But the design world, for my money, offers that sense of what could be, that I am really enthralled with and is just getting started. And again, also beauty is its own therapeutic value. Honesty, like taking the covers off my legs, not pretending they were normal fleshy legs, but getting into their particulars was so therapeutic for me. And beauty, such a gorgeous way to pull attention to something. So yeah, there's so much cool stuff that could be done in the design world. I hope that, and I think it is happening to some degree slowly, but as our population ages, as we all start living with more and more relationship with illness, maybe we're going to hit a golden age here where the design world has all sorts of things to make possible in this otherwise heretofore uninspired, downright ugly world of durable medical equipment. Like it's like a perfect example. Someone's ugly shoes, you would call them like orthopedic shoes, So anyway, okay, yes. So I guess I see a lot of hands here. Should we move on?
Yeah, sorry to cut the good answer off.
Good question.
Deb, I'm gonna unmute you here. You've had your hand up. Thank you so much for your patience.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, Deb.
Hey, how are you, BJ?
Good, thanks.
Great to see you. So my question is in a little bit of a different realm. I'm wondering if you can give me any advice on how to support people that are on disability and in that horrible place of on disability without enough living expenses to actually live and not able to make any money in any other realms, because then they'll lose the disability. I have several people in my life like that, and I just see them. I mean, they're struggling. I mean, living on so little money, $100 a month for extra expenses, and end up homeless in the summers, living in their cars, and it just heartbreaking things. And so there's a lot of people like that. I mean, there are a lot of people in my life that are living that line, and I just wondered if what's the best way to support somebody like that, and to honor where they're at, and are there other resources that I can help them with? I mean, I normally try to have them help here in the house, pay them under the table, give them vegetables from our garden, give them herbs, and listen to them, those kinds of things. But are there other things that I don't know of, and how can I really validate their experience, which is I mean, I see their life and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Ooh, Deb, thank you. That's a big one. So let's think about, I can tell you right now, my answer will be inadequate, but let's see what we can think through here. One is just to note what you're saying. And this is where these various classifications of other end up really getting intermingled with issues of class and poverty, etc. So we've got a world that doesn't value and wants to sort of get disability out of its view traditionally. So there's that. There's this sort of over this projection of patheticness, something to pity, that keeps the subject kind of gross. There have been physical barriers to folks who entering the workforce because they can't get in, like literally get into the building for the job. So there's all these structural ways that we have, and all this fallout for these various ways we isolate each other. So just to acknowledge the truth of this, and like so many issues at the policy level that touch on issues of poverty or employability, ooh, man, we've got a long way to go as a country to figuring out the right policies and how to make life more equitable. I mean, in recent, just recently with the pandemic, I remember bald public conversations around, letting the pandemic pull the herd of us, get rid of the pesky old people, those frail people, all this stuff. So like, what? I mean, it's just, so you're pointing to the layers upon layers of difficulty around this work, around these issues, and how much of it is actually made up. Now, to work within, while we're all trying to change the system, there are ways to work within it too and maximize the benefits coming your way. And for that, I would point any of us to, generally social workers are good folks to talk to about this, to get a sense of what you have access to, whether it's SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, et cetera. Not that that's adequate, but it's something. So, and then there are also independent living centers. Those are places that in the disability rights world that there can be real interesting hubs, including that have resources for all the ways we're talking, but also have this sort of spirit behind them that we're also touching upon here of inclusion, et cetera. And then beyond that, each of us can also, if we're employers, we can, include this issue in our own DEI efforts. We can actively look for someone who has a wealth of these experiences in their own lives around disability, because again, it touches on universal human themes here. So there's something to prize in these experiences and to work with. So if we're employers, let's look for folks who have these experiences. And then as in the level of being a good neighbor or an individual, one is making sure we don't infantilize each other and talk down to each other. It is stunning to watch. If you ever hung out with someone in a wheelchair, watch how few people will address them directly. They'll often address the person with them. I sometimes do it. I mean, it's just really wild. So we all could probably watch our own behaviors here to make sure we're setting a tone that we're not accidentally otherizing each other. But I think I'm not sure I have much of a better answer there, Deb, but let's keep talking about that. I want to move on to other questions because there are many coming in, but social workers, independent living centers, Alice Wong, who's a friend, she's got a beautiful blog online where you can further get more information, find community, et cetera. I can't remember the name. She put a book out recently and she has a beautiful website, but if you Google Alice Wong disability, I bet it'll come up. Great. And there's the digital sphere is a beautiful place for the disability communities because it can be liberating from the difficulties of access in other ways. So there's something of an answer to your question, Deb, but lots more to do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, I'm going to try to get to all of these. So Vijay, just to ping off really quickly what you were saying, someone actually asked about employers. I co-lead an employee resource group at the design agency where I work, and I'm energized by advocating and creating change in the way we work and what quote unquote work even means through the lens of disability. If you have any thoughts on just how to think about the workspace.
Yeah, well, one is we can all be advocates here. Again, it's not just for that poor person over there, it's ourselves too. So keep an eye out for physical access. Keep an eye out for the rhetorical language barriers that we set up for people as we set up these lines of you're inside or outside of. Really, any HR department should really understand the rights that need to be protected of people with disabilities. I've been shocked at medical schools and other places that you would think would know, do not know. So I think there's a lot to be done at the level of HR. I think there's a lot to be done at the level of just being a good colleague, keeping an eye out for just issues of access like we've been talking. And then in the hiring practice, seek folks who have these experiences of any kind of difference. So much, the human mind really gets very creative when we're faced with limitations. So you're probably, so look for it in your hiring practice. I don't know if that answers the question, Sones. Then you might have some ideas too, so jump in.
Let's see. I don't think you know, when you say just kind of recognizing, I think that's a huge part of it, is just inclusion aspect, talking about it, whatever, just making it a part of the work you're already doing. Let me go here. Jennifer, you've had your hand up. Thank you so much for your patience. You may have to mute on your end. There you go.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks so much. So my question is a little bit going back to chronic illness versus, or maybe not a good word, disability. And then you haven't mentioned chronic pain, and I kind of live with what I consider like invisible disability from a massive spinal injury and a emergency surgery and then getting damaged, but I can, with the help of medications, like I'm walking right now. That's like the best activity, but sitting or standing still or even lying in a bed, unless I'm completely flat, are not really things I can do. I can be in a fetal position or something. So it's limited my work, capacity to work, but I just wondered what you might offer or say about that within like the realm of disability, or any resources you suggest.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Right on. Thank you for reminding me. Like a couple thoughts. One is a lot of disabilities are hidden disabilities that people don't see. Mine's obvious, but plenty of them are not. And so be careful. This more of us qualify for this being part of this community than I think we even realize. And that's, I think, special. I remember when in my early days in these shoes, I would have loved if this were, I thought I would have loved this to be a hidden disability because I could hide. That would have not been that would in so many ways would have been so much harder. I really have come to believe. So just to nod to what you're pointing to, the extra, in some ways, extra difficult life of having a hidden disability. And also to your point, pain can be disabling, and I would welcome you to think of yourself as part of this community too. That is, whatever the source is, whether it's pain or other symptoms or an amputation, whatever it is, anything that's crimping your ability to function in this created world should qualify. So, a lot of us, and pain is a big one. Boy, we have a lot of patients and clients who meet that criterion. And so you're also pointing to, so what to do about that? Well, this is another reason why I hope our profession of palliative care continues to rise and continues to expand, and that the science of managing symptoms continues to evolve. At this point, less than 1% of any healthcare funding goes into researching anything that has something to do with your quality of life. So that's ridiculous or sad. We're still so seduced with fixing things or curing illness. But what about living with it? What about optimizing our lives? That's still such a small portion of the population, a portion of the funding. So one thing is to let's build palliative care. Let's build the science of pain management and other symptom management. Long way to go. But for yourself, Jennifer, I would also say, if you don't have access to a good pain doc, if you're not getting anywhere there, seek out palliative care and palliative medicine. Maybe there's something for you there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I had cancer in the past as well. So that was like part of, it was offered to me there, but in this situation, it hasn't as yet. But anyway, I come with all the resources I could have, like a lot of meditation and, long history with all that and plants. And so it's been a journey for 2 years. I'm super grateful for your work. It's like, I heard you interviewed on a podcast, and that's like how I found the site, and I'm so happy about what you're doing. Yeah, because
Thank
it's
you.
like, it was one of the only ways that I found some topics that I just couldn't find anywhere else. So thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. And yeah, we really would hope to build mental health to really expand into your big questions. So thank you for finding us. Okay, Sones, what else is out there?
Well, I hate to be the bearer of timing news, but I know you've got to head out for another appointment. So for anyone who typed in a question that we didn't get to, I've made a note of it and I'll just reach out over email. Sorry that we weren't able to get to everyone, and usually we have a little bit more time, but.
Would it help to take another 5 minutes, or should we just do another moment down the road, Sones?
Let's just do another moment down the road. I think
Okay.
I checked in with someone who had their hand up and I've made a note of questions. So I think
Okay.
we're okay. And thank you everyone for your patience. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much. Obviously, this is a tip of a big, beautiful iceberg. So thanks for waiting in. More to come. And yeah, thanks for being part of this conversation. We love it. We love you too. Okay. Bye, everybody.